Welcome to episode 3 of Vicharana. This time around, we hosted Dr. Sudeep Raj Kumar, who is an assistant professor of philosophy at Hindu College, University of Delhi. His areas of specialization include Buddhist philosophy, philosophy of time, and philosophy of memory, and his PhD thesis was concerned with developing a Bergsonian lens in order to interpret and understand Buddhaghoṣa's ideas, if I'm not wrong. In the conversation, which was hosted by Adarsh and co hosted by me, Sudeep sir traced his journey into doing research as regards Buddhaghoṣa right from his early days while pursuing his BTech degree. In the conversation, he drew several contrasts between Buddhaghoṣa's view on Buddhist causality and the works of David Hume. I think Sudeep sir also very briefly discussed Janardhan Ganeri's work and what it takes to incorporate Western ideas with Indian philosophical ideas. To end with, he touched upon Bergsonian ideas related to phenomenology and further explored philosophic questions. For Adarsh and I, this was an absolutely interesting conversation. We were so enthusiastic that towards the end, I fear and I suspect that we talked more than we let Sudeep sir talk. So, apologies for that. But it was an absolutely interesting conversation, and I hope you enjoyed as well. The conversation with Sudeep sir is coming up right now. Have great fun watching it. Well, very interestingly, like many interesting figures in philosophy, you said that your background is not really in philosophy. You did your BTech from, I hope I'm not forgetting this, from Chandigarh University or Punjab University.
Punjab Engineering College. It's called PEC.
I see.
Engineering College.
Punjab Engineering College. And then after that, you shifted to philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And of course, there must be a very interesting story, and not a story about what exactly went on around you, but what went on inside you that made you,
Yeah.
change your discipline. So, if you could speak about that as we start off the conversation, perhaps the viewers would like to know.
Yeah, sure. So I distinctly remember it was the first year of my BTech. Uh, Me and my very good friend Harpreet, we used to discuss. We both were kind of hating. We were in computer sciences at Punjab Engineering College, so we were kind of both hating the engineering aspect of it, and like I think it mostly is like engineering as such. I don't think anyone, it might be a generalization, but very few people would find it interesting, at least in the first year. So we used to discuss a lot of philosophy, and then our uh, end semester examinations were coming on, and we decided to buy some books for that. So my friend went to Sector 15 Market. It's a second hand, I mean, you get books, cheap books, no, second hand books. So he happened to see this book called The Mind's Eye. It's an amazing book. It's edited by Daniel Dennett and Douglas Hofstadter, and he was just intrigued by, I guess, the title, The Mind's Eye. And I still remember what he said to me, that he said, "I think we will find our answers here." So, and he gifted it to me one day before exams, and I think I started reading it after 3 4 months. Uh, it's The book is basically, it's like reflections on consciousness and on the nature of I, and the nature of individuality and subjectivity. It's a very tough book. I still read it when I get time. It has like different chapters by different thinkers. That the There are certain thought experiments there. There are I mean, there's some fictional stories there. There's a lot going on in the book. So that kind of opened my mind about uh, what actually I want to do. So I thought, okay, this is something which I find interesting, because I said we used to discuss philosophy, and we used to this grand ideas. But then while reading the book, I think I found a path. I thought I found a path to pursue it further. So yeah, the Mind's Eye by Daniel Dennett and Douglas Hofstadter, it kind of it was like the perfect bait for me. It acted like the perfect bait. As some philosophers say, our actions are like the world. It it attracts you to perform actions. It compels you to perform action. That book compelled me to enter into philosophy, and the journey is definitely still going on. My friend was, I mean, he was more intelligent. He was more aware than me. He did his MBA and went to Canada, and the guy who gifted me the book, and I'm here teaching, studying, and teaching philosophy. So yeah, I don't know who was the wiser one. I can't say.
So, bef- before that point, sir, before encountering Mr. Dennett and Hofstadter's books, did you not know what philosophy was all throughout your school years or till that point, into your BTech? And what did you feel about it? I mean, at least I'm pretty sure, actually, others perhaps started studying philosophy, at the early stage. Still, I think others, when do you start,
It was
reading
in
Indian
10th
philosophy and all of that?
class. It was
10th
in
class,
10th
right? And
class.
I started,
Yeah.
yes, and I'd started to get my hands on it in standard 11th, and even at that point, I would feel, well, why did I not know of this before? I had no idea this even existed as a field, as a subject. If someone asks you, well, what exactly is the ground for existence? I mean, this is a very cliche philosophical question, but people will just dismiss it. It's like, well, I'm, you would assume as a common man that there is possibly no field of study that actually inquires into this question. It's just something that people talk about. So did you not feel like that? Like, were you not taken aback by this, weird sort of ignorance that you had towards the subject? And why did I not know?
Uh, I mean, as I said, when I think he was the first person with which I could finally discuss things which I always wanted to, like read and discuss about. So, such questions like, as a student, these are very cliched questions, but we all think about them. Like, why am I here? What is the purpose of my existence? What is the meaning of life? Or like in general, like why is there, like what is all of this? Like what is this tamasha that is going on, and how to make sense of that tamasha? So these were the questions that definitely were there before, but I mean, I I did not know that I could pursue this field as a job. That thing was definite. That awareness was definitely missing in me before I started sort of reading philosophy in my BTech years. In my BTech years, I happened to meet some very sort of people who were aware of disciplines other than medicine and engineering. So I started talking to them, and then I thought, oh, okay, this is a very cool profession. Like if you sort of pursue this academically, you can make something out of it. And then of course, like we started reading about these famous philosophers and how they did, and I came to realize that, oh, all of these famous philosophers were actually university professors, or college professors. You take the name of Kant, like he was teaching philosophy. Henry Bergson, he was teaching philosophy in College de France. So yeah, I'm not saying I can be as influential and big as that. What I'm saying is that I understood that this is how philosophy can be done, and you can earn your living while doing so, which is also very important, right? While I mean, the reading philosophy part is of course great, and it's there, but we also have to look at how to sustain ourselves. So I realized that I can do both together. So that was pretty cool.
An interesting question came to me, sir, which is that we all, or at least it happened with me, Adarsh. uh, Actually, I would like to ask this to Adarsh because I never asked even him this question. Was there any philosopher that you read,
Yeah.
when you got into philosophy, who you
Mhm.
agreed with, quite deeply, and then you disagreed with him quite vehemently and quite, sharply as well, right after some time? And then
I'm
perhaps I would
not
like
sure.
to pose this question to Sir as well.
I'm not sure about that because uh, since after reading the philosophers, I started to read them in a very multiple fashion, in the sense that, uh, especially if you are with the Indian philosophical context, one thing is very peculiar to the Indian philosophy is that it very much focuses on the multifacetedness. You know that there are darshanas and multiple points of view. So uh, then and even if you engage with the philosophical works, the treatises, so they have this unique nature as well. Like, this is my theory, then this is the theory of point of view number one, and it goes on to endless list, almost 7 to 8 in numbers. So it did not make me attached to a particular thinker. So in this way, since I did not get attached to one, I did not oppose one as well. So
I see.
yeah,
What
that
about you,
was.
say? Was there some philosophical view or some philosophical position that you agreed with as you got into philosophy? Perhaps it was there in your in the backdrop. Like, yes, I agree with this, and then as you got into it, you just started to disagree with it so sharply and vehemently.
Hmm. So that's a very interesting question, but I guess I don't know. At the top of my head, I would say the absolutist, sort of the idealist, like the schools of, say, Vedantins. When I started reading it, and whatever knowledge I have seemed very attractive. For example, Advaita Vedanta. But now when I think about it, and when I try to, I don't know. There's something in me which stops me from believing it. So in that category, I think I would put Advaita Vedanta. And as very well learned people would say that I need to read more, before critiquing it. So, but there is something. Another. If we reverse this question, there was. I could never appreciate much the philosophy of Kant and his conception of space and time. Perhaps because I did not sort of thought about it deeply. But if I just reverse the question, that is there a philosopher which I now appreciate a lot, like, which for the first time when I was reading it, I did not just get him that much, or could not appreciate him. I think Kant is hugely influential, but did not influence me, or did not inspire me much. But now when I read him, we were having a study group on critique of pure reason. I mean, it's like that lens which you just cannot take off once you have wear it. I think Kant is that lens. At least now I think of him like this. That his philosophy is that lens which is like no permanently there. Now you cannot appreciate anything before bringing or some of the other aspect of his philosophy. So yeah, that is a cool change which has occurred.
We also discussed the last time we were in conversation the kind of because you or people in general do not seem to emphasize this at all, this sudden shift from engineering or some other subject to philosophy. They just
Yeah,
put it out as, well, this happened, as if it was not a hellish task to actually have the courage and also to convince the people around you that, yes, I'm going to do this. Could you talk a little bit about that before we come to the main part, the interesting bit that is going to be Bergson and
yeah,
Buddhaghoṣa?
of course, of course, of course. One thing was that I was sure about it, because in my mind I thought that, uh, at least at that time, I thought that I couldn't do anything better. As in, I could not invest my convictions didn't lie elsewhere. So I thought, like, I can invest my time and my energy and all my heart into this thing. So I was sure about that aspect. Also because there are times when you feel alienated from everything else for whatever XYZ reason. So this was a thing I wasn't alienated from. Like, this was a thing which was attracting me at that time. So of course, there were like family concerns as well. There were concerns from family, but some of my friends were very understanding and helpful, and I think they pushed me in the right direction. As in, they used to talk to me that this can be a good path for you. So sometimes like more than family, the friends with whom you spend so much time and who understand you can be a good source of comfort. So for I think in my case, I would definitely say it was more of like my friends understanding me, uh, kept on pushing that okay, something can be done here.
I think this could, go on for
Yeah.
another 10, 15 minutes, but I think now we should come to other interesting things as well. And Adarsh, you can take it up from here, right?
Yeah, so the first question, sir, which I'll try to ask you, will be again personal in a sense, even though it's related. That Buddhaghoṣa is surely a very great and influential thinker, especially in the Theravada tradition.
Yes,
But if you see, he is not the guy which will come, in the face value. If a person tries to study Buddhism, it's
yes, yes.
Nagarjuna, Dignag. So, of course, if you have embarked upon early on, when you started reading Buddhism, I'm sure that Buddhaghoṣa would not have appeared in the first place. So,
Yes.
what was that you reached this thinker, which has not been studied that much, and what made you very interested, which other Buddhist thinkers, not that much quantity, you know. Uh, so yeah, why Buddhaghoṣa? First of all, this is what I want to ask.
Thank you. That's a very interesting and a very tough question because, as you rightly said, when you talk about the most influential philosophers in the history of Buddhism, Buddha himself is there. But after that, we generally take the name of Nagarjun, Vasubandhu, Dignag, Dharamkirti. Yeah, like these are the big names.
Yeah,
One of the reasons Buddhaghosh doesn't come so often is because again it's an important question that why Buddhaghosh contributions to the Buddhist thought weren't appreciated much in the 20th century. It is because Buddhaghosh was considered as chiefly just a commentator who just elaborated upon what Buddha said. And it was seen that all the other thinkers like Nagarjun, Vasubandhu, Dignath, they had some original contribution to make to Buddhism. Now, why I said this is an important question is because this tells us something about what thinkers when people started when philosophers starting sort of reconstructing Buddhism in 19th and 20th century. My take is that thinkers which were seen as original, quote unquote, and which has something distinctive to say Nagarjun's theory of shunyata, or Dingnag's famous distinction between Swalakshana and Samanya Lakshana. So like these are very distinctive and very distinctively philosophical contributions, uh, and so they provide something new and something original, right? Why I'm saying this because Buddhaghosh is seen as the opposite of it. So there are, like, for example, Carolyn Rist Davids, a very influential Buddhist scholar of 20th century. She wrote that as to the sort of the labor of Buddhaghosh, he was an industrious laborer, but as to his original contribution, none can be found. And then David Kolupana said that David Kolupana said, okay, yeah. So David Kolupana essentially accuses Buddhaghosh of adding metaphysical elements to an otherwise empiricist orientation of Buddha. And as I said, Buddhaghosh is seen chiefly as a commentator. What changed in the last 15 years is that scholars like Maria Haim and Jonathan Ganeri, they started engaging with Buddhaghosh as a as an individual philosophical thinker who has something distinct, again, a distinctive contribution to make. not just a commentator or not just anyone who just sort of elaborated on the teachings of the Buddha. And this was one of the reasons, because as you said, he's underexplored relatively in the history of the Buddhist thought. And the second reason is the second reason is that that shift that was taking place in understanding Theravada tradition, and specifically in appreciating the contribution of Buddhaghoṣa. So, sort of my thesis then is sort of sort of a reaction against the claims of, say, Caroline T. Davids and David Kulkana, and to show that Buddhaghoṣa had pretty interesting things to say on the nature of consciousness, on the nature of action, on the nature of memory, and on the nature of temporal consciousness generally. So why Buddhaghosh? First, as you said, he's underexplored, and second is that because this is this shift happening in the last 10 to 15 years, where we are appreciating the distinctive contribution which he made in the history of Buddhist thought. So this made me, choose Buddhaghosh.
Yeah,
Nothing
and
against
plus,
other thinkers; they are amazing. I mean, they are absolutely amazing. But yeah, my it's just heart said, like Buddhaghosh is the one.
and I'm sure that it's just the start of very high level study of the Theravada tradition itself, because
Yes.
um, even though I used to study the Buddhist thought, the Theravada text did not appear to me that much. So it was very interesting thing to do. And there is again another question which arose in my mind. It might not be very related to that, but the importance of Jonardhan Ganeri, because he is the thinker which I've been reading frequently, and I see that he is not only doing researching upon philosophical texts, but what he is doing, that he is changing the traditional views through which we have been encountering Indian philosophy. One
Yes.
example which you said, that the perception of Buddhaghoṣa as a commentator, and
Yes.
in like early on, there is his book which is known as the Lost Age of Reason. So
Yeah. Yeah.
he talked about the loose networks of the Navya Nyaya philosophy
Hmm.
around the Gangetic plains. So in this way, what do you make up of these thinkers, like importance of these thinkers like Ganeri, who not only study Indian philosophy but have been influencing the way we perceive Indian philosophies and
Yes.
our dogmatic views upon and stereotypes of the Indian
Yes.
philosophy?
Yes. 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 Again, an excellent question. So, let me answer this. Let me start this with Buddhaghosh. For example, uh, when you start writing about Buddhaghosh, you can write about what he was doing, and I think this is broadly what Maria Haim did with Buddhaghosh, right? So Maria Haim talked about Buddhaghosh methodology, which is an amazing book. I mean, it's a very unique book of its kind. It's called Voice of the Buddha, and his her another work on Buddhaghosh, which is on action. So Maria Haim's method is like to tell very vividly what Buddhaghosh was doing. Ganeri, on the other hand, opens up the possibilities of, say, what can be done with Buddhaghosh, right? So again, like I mean, people like Ganeri who are like intellectual giants or of our age, they do a very tough job of contemporarizing, uh, taking these thinkers out of that ancient period and make them relevant again for the 21st century audiences, right? And they do so by, of course, engaging with the current trends in philosophy. That can be analytic philosophy, that can be cognitive sciences, it's very easy. That can be phenomenology. uh, but again, it's a very tough thing to do, because now you need to be thorough with both the traditions. You need to know the classical Indian tradition, and you also need to know the what is the current paradigm in philosophy. Like what are the major questions that require thinking in the current philosophical landscape. So, as I said, people like Ganeri who contemporize these ancient thinkers using a very modern vocabulary, and like modern concepts and categories, they are doing tremendous work. But of course, like then there are some reactions also against such kind of philosophizing. I remember I was listening to a webinar once, and uh, I forgot who was the speaker, but they specifically mentioned that this is. I mean, sometimes we can be lost in our thinking that this is the only way to do philosophy. That perhaps we need to tell people that, oh, see, these thinkers are relevant even today. But one thing is, this is not what people like really do is amazing, but we need to be cautious that this is not the only way to do it. So if you can methodologically describe an ancient thinker like Buddhaghoṣa without say bringing the current trends in philosophy, it still makes him very interesting, right? So the point being that we have to be cautious in the sense this is not the and some at least now this is the dominant way of philosophizing. We need to be conscious that this is not the only way to do philosophy, right? Because we shouldn't be going out of our way to say that, oh, see how amazing or how relevant it is. And I read a review of Ganeri's Attention Not Self, which said that, for example, Ganeri makes a distinction. Now I think I remember between philosophy of thought and philosophy of cognition. If I'm not wrong, so he makes this distinction early on in his book, and the reviewer was very impressed that, see, this is Ganeri's distinctive contribution to say the philosophy of mind or consciousness. But what the reviewer was sort of mentioning that the reviewer still did not understand what contribution those Pali Buddhist philosophers like Buddhaghoṣa, uh, uh, like what did they contribute in Ganeri's project of attention not self. So that also got me thinking, that I mean, it's a challenge. As I said, it's a very tough thing to do. That how do we make these thinkers relevant and enter into contemporary debates? So, and I guess this question will always remain, and we have to. That is why I said it's such a tough way of doing philosophy. That you have to be thorough with two such distinctive traditions, and such distinctive, like, thorough with what happened and thorough with what is going on. Yeah, it's
And
like double.
Others, before
yeah,
you, yes, before you move on,
yeah,
just a little question. You
yeah.
know, so you discussed that book review and Ganeri's idea and how they were relevant to the Pali tradition and Buddhaghoṣa. So,
Yeah,
what was the exact comment about? I mean, was it about the fact that Ganeri's ideas can be traced to Buddhaghoṣa and the Pali tradition, and he's not aware of that, or were they trying to inquire into how his ideas, which are original
hmm,
relate to the Pali tradition? I couldn't
yeah,
quite get it.
yeah. So the comment was that Ganeri's contribution is, I mean, is unique. I mean, his original. His contribution is original, and the reviewer didn't say that it could be traced. What the reviewer asked was, what were like, how did those ancient Pali philosophers could help Ganeri in his pursuit of, say, understanding the nature of consciousness. So Ganeri himself has distinctive contributions, but how those Pali philosophers like Buddhaghoṣa were like kind of helpful in this endeavor. I said this is an open-ended question for all of us. That h- how can we how can we take help from them? Such ancient, I mean, thinkers which existed sort of long before. Uh, how could we? Well, what do we do again to make them relevant for the current? Or do we have to do it? That's the point. Do we have to do it? Do we have to make them sort of this relevant? right? Uh,
Yes, I
Again,
suppose that is also a question that we should ask, right? I mean, all right, I said something about a theory X. Now, is it relevant that I trace that theory X with 1,000 other philosophers who have given theories A, B, C, D? Uh, so, because you said, right, this is not the only way to do philosophy, to bring up philosophers from the past and then relate it with the current milieu. So maybe we could just do philosophy in its radical newness, to use delusion terms very naively. Others should
yeah,
probably know, but yes, I suppose that's there.
right, right. Just to clarify, what I meant was uh, that we could just describe what the those ancient philosophers were saying on their own terms, without making them sort of relevant to the contemporary times. So
I see, I
that's what,
see, I see.
right. Uh, Radical newness is
It's
like too
it's
radical.
Yes, yes, all right. I think I get you now. And the thing also is, it's quite disrespectful, isn't it? That we say, well, in order to make these old philosophers, old Indian philosophers relevant. I mean, I don't know what you would have to say about this. Maybe you disagree, Sudeep sir, but just a comment. Um, in order to make these old Indian philosophers relevant, we need to in some way relate them to the modern milieu, as if
Yeah,
as if the modern environment and the modern philosophical thought is going to make them relevant. This is the criteria for their relevance. It's like they cannot stand on their 2 feet on their own, right? So that's there.
it's not like it's they can't stand on their own, but it's like it becomes easy to disseminate their ideas at a much broader level than say just Indian school, Indian universities and Indian colleges. You can bring, you can sort of take these ideas at a global level. So then these thinkers will then be can be taught, say, in the American universities or the UK universities or the French universities in the philosophy curriculum. If we show their, if we show them, oh, see, they had such interesting answers to give for the modern problems. Uh, so I mean, that is sort of that is the idea behind it. That is the motivation behind doing philosophy like this.
Interestingly, I had a related question to that, I think, which has been answered now only, which was about your experiences. You earlier talked about your experiences at Myanmar Library of Theravada text. Am
Yeah,
I
yeah.
right here?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So, actually, there are two questions related to that. Since
Mhm.
you have been studying Theravada traditions of the Buddhism, this example showed one thing, that other than theoretical research, you have been seeing upon the the libraries and all those things which have been related to Theravada traditions. So, can
Mhm.
you tell about your explorations, more of a
Yeah,
physical explorations of this Theravada tradition of Buddhism, like the Myanmar library thing?
yeah, yeah. Yes. So, the in at least Myanmar, Buddhaghoṣa is considered as equal to Buddha himself in terms of his godly status. So, in fact, in Myanmar, and I guess to some extent in Sri Lanka as well, especially in Myanmar. I mean, I could see the kind of reverence that was shown to him. So it was a workshop, 15-day workshop on Pratitya Samutpad. In Pali, we call it Patitya Samutpad, the principle of dependent origination, which some scholars say, and most of the scholars say that it is the core of the Buddhism, like one of the central ideas. So it was a 15-day workshop on that. I got to study with monks there. So there were it was a monastery come an educational institution in Pulwin. It was an amazing place. It used to rain like twice a day, and we used to live in something called kutis, which was at the top of the hill. So the monastery was at the top of the hill, and there were these kutis. Amazing drainage system. Every The food was amazing. Everything was amazing. But what sort of what I guess the highlight of that was to uh, I mean, there are two distinct points here. First of like studying with those monks for 15 days and reading the original text, the Pali text, and reciting and chanting with them, it was a surreal experience, right? It was like, oh, you are now living what the living the tradition. So it was a distinctive learning experience for me. But uh, uh, simultaneously, it also sort of, I had this thought that what, as philosophers, as a philosopher, when you study and reflect on Buddhist philosophy or the Buddhist tradition, it was very different from, say, how a monk would approach it. And I don't mean in that sense that we are more rigorous, or like they are less rigorous, in the sense that training in philosophy, and this is from a personal experience, and that training in philosophy and its method and its concept and its tools, uh, that is important if we have to sort of explore philosophy from the Buddhist texts. So, say for example, and like they were amazing people. Those they used to extract certain ideas, say regarding, like how fertility takes place and etc. etc. And they used to just, of course, they accepted it, that this is how things sort of happen. But as philosophers, we get to know, right, that what we can extract and what we can sort of avoid. So the point being that, it was a very good experience, learning experience, to recite the original text with the monks. But also I got to understand that as a philosopher, we have to approach these texts very differently, right? So of course, living with them and like living the tradition itself helps in understanding, but so do reading philosophy and like the methods in philosophy and philosophical tools and concepts. Those are equally important. Now, I don't know if that
Hmm.
answers your question or not.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Surely it has. And even though there are multiple questions on the aspect of the general ideas of Buddhism, I'll try to go into the specificities of Buddhaghoṣa himself.
Yeah.
It seems to be an endless if we talk about a certain topic. So,
Yeah.
as far as I have understood, your research project on PhD thesis. Initially, I did not get the Bergsonian lens you were trying to put upon Buddhaghoṣa, but afterwards I did realize that it's quite different from Bergson, and it's one thing which very interested me was you said that momentariness. Let me rephrase 2 to 3 points which are seem central to me. The first is that the dhammas are not discrete. This is very interesting to me. You are going to talk about momentariness,
Hmm.
but not discreteness. And
Yes.
somewhere I read that momentariness does not imply discreteness.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it was today which I thought, and it suddenly changed my whole view upon Buddhism in a way. Somehow, the attachment to the human kind of causality, got
Yeah.
broken suddenly.
Yeah.
So before giving multiple points of view, because I'm very interested in this,
Hmm.
uh, please would you summarize your this thesis upon Buddhaghoṣa, especially on the momentariness and discreteness.
Yeah, no, in fact, that momentary and discreteness part is very important. It kind, because it kind of, it's an important argument in my thesis. So my thesis is about the construction of temporal awareness in Buddhaghoṣ. How do we conceptualize that? And Buddhaghoṣ understands the categories of time, that is samay, and consciousness, that is chit, mutually. So Buddhaghosh writes that Samay and Chit mutually determine each other. So you can, so I mean, there is no ontological priority between the one or the two. They sort of, it is the flow of consciousness which sort of constructs or generates temporal experience. And my thesis was, how does this happen? Sort of like, like, so what is consciousness? What are consciousness factors? What are the types of factors, and how do they relate with each other to generate temporal awareness? So this was my topic. And here, what I found was that this idea of this what the dominant Humean lens in understanding Buddhist notion of causality. And now when I say Buddhist, I mean Buddhaghoṣa, right? Because Buddhists themselves would disagree a lot on, what is the nature of a mental factor and how do they relate to each other. So uh, now, I mean, I'll just focus on what Buddhaghoṣa has to sort of say. So, right, so so now the question is how these mental factors relate with uh, each other, right? So here what I found was that the Humean lens was the dominant one in understanding Buddhist causality, which is that somehow these mental factors or mental states are discrete, disconnected nodes, and they get related with each other, which is called after the matter causation. Like initially to start with, they are disconnected, and then you sort of relate them causally after the fact of their disconnection. And uh, so my thesis argued that this mistaken view of discreteness is coming from momentariness. So what I argued was that scholars incorrectly conflated momentariness with discreteness. So momentariness of phenomena does not entail their discrete. And of course, Buddhaghoṣa is also committed to momentariness. That all the mental and physical phenomena are momentary in nature. But his view of momentariness is very different from, say, someone like Digna, which is also very interesting. There are internal differences when it comes to the theory of momentariness within Buddhism, right? So my thesis tried to argue that the notion of uh, 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 momentariness does not entail the notion of discreteness, because dhammas to start with, and sorry, I'm using the word dhamma. Dhamma mean mental factors. Our mental states to start with are found in this interlocking sort of fusion type relationship. You can break them apart, but this breaking up of this breaking up part you do, through analysis. So yeah, right now it's so there are two complementary ways of understanding dhammas and their relationship, mental factor and the relationship. First is analysis, the second part is synthesis. If you employ only the analysis part, then you reach the conclusion that mental factors are discrete, and then you say, oh, their causation is based upon Humean causation. But the analysis part is just one half of the coin. The other half of the coin is the synthesis part, which is beautifully explained as in Pratitya Samutpad does. But the sort of the extension to Pratitya Samutpad is the Abhidhamma text of Pathan. Now, Pathan is a huge text in which many sort of it's a text about relationships, as in between one dhamma and another dhamma, how many kinds of relationships can exist. And in Pathan, broadly, 24 kinds of relationships are mentioned at a very broad level. So the point is that the dhammas that you get after analyzing, they are also present in this causal relationships to start with, and that synthesis part you found in the text of Pathan. And what I argued was that in Buddhaghoṣa, uh, again, you find these both aspects, as in analysis and synthesis. And once you take them together, the analysis and the synthesis part, now you cannot argue that dhammas are discrete entities. And if dhammas are not discrete entities, then you have to sort of shoo away that Humean lens. And interestingly, Henry Bergson critiqued the Humean associationism in his book, the first book, Time and Free Will, and Henry Bergson has also a paper critiquing Humean causality. So I thought, okay, what Hume does for me is, first of all, it by critiquing Humean causality, I can critique that understanding Buddhist causation in terms of discrete mental factors is incorrect, right? Because then you have to accept human sort of conclusions, which I don't think Buddhists would agree with. And second is that it opens up the conceptual space for me to bring in Henry Bergson and to bring in Bergson's framework, because Bergson is also critiquing the kind of associationism which which was a sort of my attack on the contemporary scholars who interpret Buddhists in a human way. So yeah, Bergson served two purposes for me, my thesis.
Yeah, and sir,
I mean, sometimes when you explain it, this I mean, lose track of the ideas. I hope it made sense.
yeah. It surely is making. And I think this is the great example of the previous thing which we were talking about. You can say the pitfalls of always contemporarizing things, because I would say the main mistake it was that we somehow made equivalent the Buddhist causality to human causality. Why? Because
Yes,
it shows one thing in us, that we are always searching for anchoring points in Western scholars. Okay, so this
yes,
is human. We can discuss Buddhist in terms of human.
yeah,
Just
yes,
when I read your paper, I inquired upon one thing basically, that if the space and time are not discrete, divided or distinct that much, then when we are going to apply pratitya samutpada, how we are going to apply? Basically, for the viewers, let me give an example which is very famous in Buddhist cases, is that of the idea of Indra's net. So there is the world of small, I would say, jewels which are infinite, and they reflect upon each other infinitely. So in each jewel there is a view of every jewel. So this is the idea of interpenetration. So one thing which I noticed, that which was going to be my next question, that Buddhists don't talk about cause and effect. They always talk about multiple causes and conditions.
yes,
Things arise from the multiplicity of the causes, and it is totally different from classical human way of thinking, and it makes all the different, because if even through temporal plane this pratitya samutpada, or the causality of interpenetration is happening, then how can you talk not about the synthesis which you talked about earlier, the analysis and the synthesis? The whole idea of pratitya samutpada ensures synthesis, and it made me realize the discreteness cannot be compatible, it seems to me now, with this whole idea of pratitya samutpada. Even though there are multiplicities, there is a space for relation. So yeah, it shows that the mistake of contemporarizing things, uh, in that relation, I had the question which was, uh, yeah, so can you tell about the definition of dhammas in a specific sense, because since it has many connotations, it can be confusing for the audience first.
yes, yes. Yeah. Oh, in fact,
And so,
the
just
the
to add on, could you also comment comment on Adarsh's comments as well, because he brought up an interesting point, to analyze or to understand Pratit Samutpad from this lens of multiplicity and multiple causes, and there is no linear, chronology or a linear sequence of causes. That as well.
Yes, yes, sure, sure. So as you rightly mentioned, this always they claim that causality is not from say one cause to one effect. It's always multiplicity of causes producing multiplicity of effects. And very interestingly, Henry Bergson said that he never talks about time, he talks about duration. He says duration is a qualitative multiplicity, in which different elements are fused together, and he calls it sort of, it's like confusion, and a confusion in a positive sense, and in which things are penetrated into each other, and when you sort of dissect them, then you are spatializing them. Yeah, that's works. But yeah. In fact, Buddhaghoṣa in Vishuddhimag explicitly says that if Buddhists also start believing in single cause, then the what he calls Prakritivadin, the Sankhya philosophers, they will, then their philosophy would be similar to Sankhya philosophy, because Sankhya believe in one cause of Purusha, right? So Buddhaghoṣa says that Buddhists cannot commit to the theory of single causation, as in a single cause producing multiplicity of effects, because that will bring them closer to the Sankhya philosophy. We say that it's always multiplicity of causes producing multiplicity of effects. As to the point you said about this succession, linear succession, that is an interesting point, because I think Buddhists would still say that it's this change is happening in a linear way, as in when I say linear, I mean it's happening in single direction. Now, why I'm saying is that because in philosophers like, for example, Henry Bergson, you get this idea that the past is ontologically distinct from present. That you cannot understand past in terms of the present, because both are two very distinct kind of entities. Like Ferguson talks of past in general. Uh, I'm saying this because when you say time or temporality or understanding of like how we experience time is non-linear, then you are giving that ontological status to the past. Then you are saying that the past does not just extinguishes, it's there, independent of our present. So that will take us to this idea of non-linear notion of time, like past having an the irreducibility of the past into the present. But I'm still exploring whether I can get Buddhaghoṣa to commit to this position. In fact, this is the paper I'm currently working on. Like how do we make sense of past in general and memories in Buddhaghoṣa? Is there an ontological way in which even Buddhaghoṣa would commit to the past? And I want to argue that yes, they have Buddhaghoṣa have to do it. Like he should do it, and I think that would enrich his own position. But that is what I'm thinking about. I mean, like working on right now.
It seems to be that the whole project of Buddhaghoṣa is on a very interesting trajectory, and perhaps this whole comment, which wait for us.
Yeah.
So till then, I would like to raise a small little question which has to do more with Bergson and
Yes.
his idea of duration. So I think, I mean, I only know of whatever Bergson was thinking about through YouTube videos and lectures, right? I mean, haven't even read the secondary sources yet, let alone the primary source, which was which one of his books? In which book exactly did he talk about duration and time exactly? There is one creative evolution where he
Yeah.
talks about evolution, and I
Yeah.
suppose there is another one, right? I'm forgetting the name.
I mean, Bergson starts talking about duration in his first major work itself, that is Time and Free Will, and then like so the I mean, his philosophy starts with Time and Free Will and Creative Evolution. I think it is like most famous work in a way, but it comes much later in the career. But the seeds of creative evolution can be found in his earlier works, definitely. So the idea of duration remains central to him. But in Time and Free Will, it is still restrictive to the subjective experience, so to say, if I can say this. In creative evolution, the fact of duration, the fact of this time or temporality, it becomes universal to the extent that like there is now Ferguson will say that even there is a memory of the universe itself. So it becomes this grand project when we reach creative evolution.
And it seems one of his main points of emphasis is, correct me if I'm wrong, looking at time as something that has to, this is, I suppose, the analogy that he uses, or the scholars use, that time has this quality of intensity instead of being extended. We can think of it as intensity, right? Would this be a correct analogical understanding of his idea? Now then,
Yes,
it
yes.
is very interesting. It is very interesting that intensity is not something that we would use in the vocabulary of spatiality. So when we are describing spatial objects, we say they're discrete, they're hard, they're solid, they're sharp, they're smooth. But we won't say that any spatial object is intense, right? Of course, we could only use the word intense when we are again referring to something that is on the inside, right? Say, I look at my mother, and she's full of love for me. She's very proud of me. So I could say that my mother looked very intense. My father's angry, something like that. What's this voice, Adarsh? Is it from your side?
I'm not sure. Let me mute.
All right, all right. In any case, so it seems that to understand the Bergsonian idea of time, we have to use vocabulary which is specifically non-spatial, and maybe mainly it would be auditory, right? Because sounds are intense. Sounds can be intense. We can identify, oh, this sound is intense and that sound is not. Maybe touch, tactile sensations can be intense. So it seems that there is a certain vocabulary attached to spatiality, and then there is a certain vocabulary which is attached to you know our auditory faculty or our tactile faculty, and there is a sort of exclusivity between those two vocabularies. We cannot use one vocabulary, or one vocabulary cannot smoothly translate into another. And I ask this because, I've been looking into Thomas Nagel's paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat,
Mhm.
right? And there he talks about how might it be for a bat to be a bat, and then he goes on to even describe a little bit at least the apparatus of perception that a bat has, that it is three-dimensional and forward perception and all of this, if you have read it. And I would if I could I would like to ask Nagel a question. When what Could it be the case that we are using these human categories to understand the bat's perception, whereas the bat might have a certain vocabulary to define its own perception in a way that is specific to the auditory nature of its own perception. So, instead of saying, "Oh yes, yes, yes," a bat, of course, sees an object, whereas a bat might say, "What nonsense are you talking about? I never see an object. I only hear objects." So it uses words like hair, and objects are intense for me, and these sort of words which are specific to his phenomenology. This is a very, a muddled up question. It's a very big
Yeah.
thing to explore and for you to comment upon. But if you could comment on it in any way, anything that you found interesting in this entire thing.
Yeah, yeah. And you rightly said it's a very big question and very big themes. And the only issue is that I won't be able to remember everything that I want to say, because like I read bits about it here and there. But coming to the first question about your reflections on Bergson, you rightly said he talks in the language of intensities and what it means to feel, like what it means to experience, rather than, so he will talk about not about the source of experience. He'll talk about how will that how will I feel it. And here I think he's critiquing the psychophysics of his time that happens in the first part of Time and Free Will. In the sense that he makes this fundamental distinction between quantity and quality in time and free will. So there are things, though these things are ontologic fundamentally different. So there are some qualitative aspects of our experience, there are some quantitative aspects. As you said, the quantitative aspects we understand by spatializing them. For example, you go to the library, and the books are neatly arranged in the library, with clear cut distinctions. They are discrete, they are disconnected. This is how we, and this is how spatialization takes place. We And he takes the example of, for example, feelings here. When you talk about I feel less joy or more joy, now what you're doing is you're taking joy as this homogeneous experience, and you are understanding it by assigning to it levels, as in, like as if it was possible to do so. But Bergson says this is a mistaken way of thinking, and it is partly because our habitual ways of representing stuff. Now we represent stuff by dissecting them, by delineating them, by sort of making distinctions. But it is different from how we experience them. So, for example, he will say that it's very difficult to assign levels to how would you experience joy. So it's never less joy or more joy, or like these levels. When you experience them, those are qualitative experiences, and you can't count them. You can't you can't sort of again spatialize them. You can't divide them. It's an intensity which cannot be sort of divided into discrete levels. And one when you are conceptualizing your experiences in that way, in a qualitative way, now you're dealing with time, that is temporality, and not with space. So here Bergson is critiquing Kant's parallelism of space and time by saying that time and space are essentially two very fundamental things. In space we count, and temporality is that qualitative aspect where we experience. The entire first book, Time and Free Will, is full of these ideas. I don't want to. I mean, I can go on and on, but that's for another time. But coming to a second question, which is also very interesting. Now, there's this new way of there is this philosopher who has a book called Smellosophy. I am forgetting the name of the philosopher. So what they argue is that our model of the mind is primarily based upon how we see, how we visualize, because humans are primarily visual beings. But we forget that we have this other modes of engagement in the world. And what this particular philosopher, by the name, her book's name is Philosophy. We can sort of Google it to know the name. What she argues is that if we take smell as the paradigm in which with which we engage with the world, perhaps it can tell us something else about how we experience. Then by not restricting ourselves to this visual mode of experiencing or visual mode of representation. So you very rightly said that I mean humans have a particular cognitive apparatus. Like we can only see within a certain bandwidth, we can only hear within a certain frequency. So there are cognitive limitations imposed upon us when we start our contact or engagement with the world. I don't know. So how do we know? Like what else is there? And this is such an interesting question, and like I do think about it, and I'm glad that you brought this up here. uh, Again, I can only ask, did it make sense? These are such
So it does not
difficult.
matter if it makes it does not matter, sir, if it makes sense or not. What matters is, I mean, of course it made sense, but the more important thing is, can we get something? Could we get something out of it? That is more important. And in fact, I would like to thank you very much, sir, because now I feel extremely happy that you recommended me this book's philosophy, because in fact I'm trying to write this paper which has to do exactly with something like this, so it is going to help me a lot. So thank you a lot for this. I'm going to read this.
Yeah. Is there any issue on recording because your photo is not visible? Is it happening to you, Sudeep sir, as well? Is
For
Ayush
me,
visible?
Ayush photo is frozen.
Uh, so do
Stuck.
make sure that, yeah.
And let me just add one point. You talked about language now. So Bergson has this in Time and Free Will. He writes that what language does is it freezes. Language functions by freezing the flowing nature of reality. So, for example, I have this mug with me. I now this mug is in perpetual flux, but I call it a mug because I want to freeze it. So concepts work by freezing the essentially flowing nature of reality. And it's interesting you took the question of language here, because as per Bergson, language functions by freezing. or crystallizing, or just uh, uh, stopping, what is essentially a very dynamic and ever changing reality. So your photo was like that. It was stuck. It was frozen at that time.
Uh,
Is it fine now or is it still stuck?
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's fine.
All right, all right.
Uh, Perhaps I have to comment something. I have two comments. First of all, it's related to Ayush and what you said, sir. I did someone who was a blind guy, and he was a phenomenologist. Since he was blind, his phenomenology had a twist because phenomenology is, to an extent, in a Husserlian mode, is expressing what appears to be. So what appears to be to a blind can only blind write that. So basically, he was not blind from the birth. Uh, it seems like Ayush, you are not visible
I
again,
can
but
see.
do make sure it's
I can see.
recording. Yeah, so I guess I should continue. Uh,
I'm sorry. Sudeep sir, am I not visible on your end as well?
Now again, your photo is stuck, but I can hear you, and I think
yeah, yeah.
Right, because the thing is, all right. So apparently, I'm visible to myself, and everything is fine on my end.
And
So
fine,
yeah,
fine.
even
that's
if
okay.
yes, even if something goes wrong, I'll fix it when we're editing. Also, Sudeep sir, how long would you like to comfortably extend this? Because it's an hour and 10 minutes, so maybe 30 more minutes. Would that be all right?
Yeah,
All right.
Yeah, so the example was that he was not blind from birth. So initially, what ideas he had of time and space were based on visual as well. But after becoming blind, he had three stages, as far as I remember. Initially, things appear as holistic to him, but after a certain time, things did not appear to him, because if you just see the nature of the visual space, you
hmm.
can see multiple things. I'm able to see Sudeep sir as well and Ayush as well. But in
Correct.
auditory space, let's say the world, uh, I can hear only a discrete. The word discrete would not be a great, but it's not like I can hear multiple things. Even if I hear, they will be automatically combined. So this idea of holistic nature of vision is very peculiar to vision itself. I cannot touch multiple things, parts of my body. So
Hmm.
tactile world is not as holistic as the visual world. So after he went blind, initially he still used to have this holistic approach to the space, but after a certain time it went off. The world became totally different for him. So this was an interesting anecdote which came to my mind. And another is about your comment on language and
Hmm.
Bergson's idea of language about the cup. I saw a TED talk in which the person was trying to show that we need to paint things, and painting is more just than an art, because when you paint a tree, it's different than just seeing the tree, because when you are seeing the tree, it's common for everyone. But I am drawing different tree and you are drawing different tree, so the nuances are
Hmm.
uh, on that comment. Something I think I can relate to the next question which I am asking is that
Can I just add
perhaps if,
something here? Because I have an interesting
yeah,
anecdote
yeah,
of myself. I remember we were doing this class of Frege, na, in which we were talking about the Frege talks about the greenness of the grass and the external world and etc. And I remember I said this in class. We can so there is this green grass, and then we can visualize that greenness in our minds. And I remember I was asking everyone, we can do that, right? And one student said no. I said, okay, why not? Then I remember she told me that she has some condition called aphantasia. In aphantasia, we are unable to visualize stuff, and there are no visual images. There are only, so think about if I say apple, I'm sure you can visualize apple in your minds. Now, people who have aphantasia, not a disorder. As such, it's just an interesting variation of human psyche. Some people can't have images in their minds. They can't form those images. And that was the first time, to be honest, I got to know about there's something called aphantasia. That then I read some literature on that. That as you said, no, that the blind person had very different notions about time and space, and I want to know that even such conditions like affectation reveal something different about mental experiences and the nature of the mind, and etc etc, and such we should be knowing about such variations. Yeah, so yes, please others
There
continue.
is also another interesting, as you say, variation on the human psyche, of course, which Sudeep said you might know, and others you might know as well, which is synesthesia, right? So that is also something very
Yeah.
interesting to look into. That's in
Yes.
fact even more interesting than just aphantasia. So that's that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So I have something like I'll try to combine it with the next question itself, so that perhaps the next question gets the chance to come. Uh, uh, it is again going back to the Pratitya Samutpada, and again which I had this thought upon that. Uh, like the relationship of cause and effect, since we talked about that, let's just name it as a field where multiplicity of the causes exist. And these Buddhists have a very the way they reason, there is one peculiarity among them, that you know uh, dependent upon x y arises. They always talk about arising. uh, so between the cause and effect, I would say that there is this multiplicity of the causes which always exists, because as I said, that they always talk about multiplicity of the causes rather than a single cause themselves. Uh, so I was saying, like, let me give a common example. So I was reading all your research papers, and I was very anxious whether I would be able to frame things in a certain well way or not. So what did I do? That I read things, I made the questions, I made, let's say, 10 questions. I reframed again into 5 questions, and then I wrote the final questions again. But when I am interviewing, in the process of interviewing you, I'm not seeing the question itself. you know so there is something to trace between the cause and effect relationship. What happened is that I was dependent. If I would not have practiced writing and writing all those questions, I might not have been able to frame the questions the way I am able to frame them. But now I do not need to look at the papers. So what's happening, that the effect is dependent upon cause, but after a certain time it becomes independent upon it. Like, if I would not have written, I would not able to articulate well, but now I do not need to read these papers. So this again came in the context of the multiplicity and pratitya samutpada, and that they do not believe in swabhavas as well. So I am going naive, I might be going naive because it's a claim from my thought, but it's interesting that but they say that, let's say, y came from x, so they are not non-substantialist. So it's x, the cause itself is non-substantial. But even though in a very what can you say, not in a fundamental manner, but swabhavika nature, x has some reality, the cause has. but
Of course.
but when in the process of production of the effect, in between somehow we get into the world of multiplicity of the causes, where the identity of the cause itself dissolves, and then afterwards the effect becomes independent. Let's say the moment of when I am articulating and when I'm engaged in the questions again, and I just forget the what had been written. I'm just in the flow, interesting ideas coming up along and along, and in that flow I ask you certain things.
Hmm.
So we can trace the history of the effect from the cause, but now the effect is totally independent. So in this way, the Buddhists seem very similar. Perhaps it is from the Buddhist perspective this idea came along. You know, uh, upon their idea of multiplicity of the causes, uh, and it's related to the Bergsonian idea in such a way that Ayush came along a certain question and you commented upon that, and again Ayush came into another question. So what was happening in me was, I had certain ideas, like, okay, I also had this story and this story. What happened was, the nature of the language got intense, as you were talking earlier. So the whole discourse of the interview, after a certain time, it did not become interview for me. It's somehow due to the conversation itself, so many ideas started to arise. you know so this was the nature of the conversation itself, which creates a certain intensity, you know which
Right.
a language which cannot do, because it suppresses things. By saying just a tea or cup, you cannot just fathom the holiness of that thing itself. In a similar way, the language might say that it was an interview, but for me it was reaching a state of intensity, where the creativity started to overflow. So this
Hmm.
intensity cannot be spoken by any identities or language itself, or perhaps it might be called as the field of the multiplicities, which the Buddhists also point out. So yeah, this was something like I
Right.
don't know what to go upon, but as Ayush said, that something might come along with this
Yeah.
interpretation.
And in fact, this was very interesting. Very, I mean, at points I lost it. I was like, what exactly is he talking about? But precisely, if I were to talk about something out of this, I will be able to talk about a lot of things. And in fact, I will ask you a question regarding this, Sudeep sir, after you have your time to reflect and talk about this comment.
Sure. Sure. Do you want to comment upon it now or later?
No, sir, because he has already said so much that it will only muddle up the
I
quality of what you are going to say. So it's better that
have
we
to
go ahead.
absorb. I have to absorb it a bit. Can't say anything just right away.
All right, so maybe I could anchor it in a slightly different direction and also tradition, and then maybe you'll have something to say about it. In the meantime, you can think about it, which is the Sartrean, and I don't know to what extent Heideggerian idea of facticity and transcendence. I mean, specifically, this is in Sartre, right? That of course there is this facticity to us. There is this nexus of causality that determines in each step what we are going to do. But at every point of time, the human being has this ability to transcend it, which is why he says that we are condemned to be free, that we are ultimately free. Even if I say that, oh, I'm just doing everything because I'm predetermined to do all of this. Even this utterance, in some sense, is has a radical sense of novelty and me exercising my own freedom. And so, of course, yes, I can say two things here. Towards the end, I think Adarsh went off on a completely different tangent, which was more about how language cannot precisely map out reality, so to speak, right? I mean, of course, in language I talk of identities and discreteness. This is a lot like talking about time and thinking about time in the vocabulary of spatiality and the vocabulary of what we hear and what we touch. If I speak about time in the with the vocabulary or with the use of spatial vocabulary, I cannot get the momentariness and the flow and the continuity of it. Everything is going to be discrete. So ultimately, I'm not going to have that idea of time which Bergson struck upon. Whereas if I just change my vocabulary, I can get closer to it. But perhaps it could be the case that there are some ideas, as he Adarsh discussed, and he said, I suppose. Um, there being an interview and there being certain questions and then actually doing the interview and realizing, oh well, this isn't even an interview, I'm just exploding with ideas, and I do not have to look at the questions, I'm just going about this idea of this flow, right? And that cannot be captured into language. And I suppose then language only becomes this means to inquire into and pursue new paths of creativity instead of trying to ground that creativity into language. So this could be one thing. And of course the original point, which is the relation with the Sartrean idea of facticity and transcendence, if that is helpful to make sense out of whatever others said, that there is this causal nexus which precedes us, but it seems like there is always something that escapes it in our acts, in our actions. And maybe I don't know, I have no idea how the Buddhists account for subjectivity, right? If they think that me I mean this phone turning itself, this light, this phone turning itself on has the same causal nexus and the same causal nature as me speaking. I don't know what is the case with the Buddhists. I have not studied it.
No, no.
But perhaps you could also talk about or think about or explore how exactly do they account for subjectivity? Because Sartre, of course, does it by the distinction between pour soi and on soi, right? Being for itself and being in itself. There is this objective state of existence and the subjective state of existence. And the subjective state of existence, of course, is that which always transcends its facticity. So this is, of course, a lot. But Sudeep sir, if you have anything to say about
Yeah.
this, it seems we just overwhelmingly, burdened you with a lot of thoughts. So we're sorry about that.
No, no, amazing thoughts. But very, very nice comments both of you made. I'll just answer to what you asked about how Buddhists would account for subjectivity, because that's like a question, Everything else is just amazing thoughts from you people. In fact, the account of Pratitya Samutpad in the early discourse, I mean, in the early Buddhism, is precisely to tell you, it's precisely an account of subjectivity. What I mean by subjectivity is that how an individual immersed in the world, making contact with the world, will sort of, like experience it. So, what Pratitya Samutpad, its 12 links, does is they explain what are the fundamental uh, again how a person encounters the world. So what are the processes that are happening when an individual immersed in the world lives it. So the links in the Pratitya Samutpad, in the early interpretation of it, I mean in the Pali discourses and in some Abhidhamma and Pali literature, precisely tells you the constitution of subjectivity. So next time you read Pratitya Samutpad, it's basically this only. Okay, that how do different elements interact with each other to uh, again at the phenomenal level, how do we understand our experiences? Why I'm saying this, because at the early level, because the understanding of Pratitya Samutpad itself shifted with like with as time passed on. I mean, the chronological time passed on. So what happened was, uh, earlier the application of Paticca Samutpad was exclusively on the subjective level, the individual level. Even though there is no subject, as in no Atman or no soul in Buddhist, but Buddhist has to explain, right, how to experience the world. So that is precisely what the count of Paticca Samutpad does. But as tradition developed and as tradition changed, the concept of Pratitya Samutpad took this universal character, in the sense that Pratitya Samutpad became this theory about how everything is related with everything else and how we can understand the production of everything. Now you can apply this concept of Pratitya Samutpad, say, to stars and to, as you said, mobile phone. Of course, the elements which are interacting with each other in the star and in the mobile are different, but the idea is that you, in some sense, you could explain that their existence is also owed to dependent origination. So we see this shift happening in the scope of the principle of Pratitya Samutpad, or dependent origination. When it comes to subjectivity in the early discourses, the application was exclusively on the individual, the empirical, I mean, the empirical individual, so to say, the the metaphorical I, not the substantive I, just the uh, metaphorical I.
So yeah,
It is very interesting, by the way, Adarsh and Sudeep sir, that in the West, the analysis of causality goes from the objective to the subjective, whereas apparently in the Buddhist tradition, it went from
Yeah.
subjectivity to objectivity. That's
True.
interesting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So I
you're right.
think Adarsh, we should now come to the part where we discuss
yeah,
very interesting tweets from Sudeep sir, right? Because we also have to conclude the conversation. So I
yeah,
suppose this was good enough an introductory conversation on Buddhaghoṣa and Bergson. Although we did not, I was actually not here for a little while because if I were not to leave, then the milk that was on the stove, which I had forgotten about, it would have just exploded. So I had to go. So I don't know to what extent were we able to relate Bergson and Buddhaghoṣa, but I certainly hope that Sudeep sir, you were satisfied with this part of the conversation.
Yes. Also, we can do it. I mean, in a thorough manner at any other point of time.
Yes,
Please
of
just
course. We can have future conversations with this conversation as a background, and of
yes.
course something more productive can come about. So I suppose with the
Uh,
tweets, maybe there was this. Yes,
Ayush,
go ahead, Adarsh.
yeah, yeah. Just taking a 2 to 3 minutes more. I
Yeah,
won't
Sure,
take
sure,
that
sure.
much after that. For concluding the Buddha Gosha part, because the whole, I would say, sir, I would ascribe it to you that you totally changed my whole perception of how I used to see Buddhism. Especially it came to a certain point that Ayush was naturally talking, that how momentariness is opposed to discreteness. The kind of success it led, your ideas led to us. Uh, so I would just read your, part from your paper,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the ending comments for that. So you say that in the fourth chapter, we would attempt to bring out for Buddhaghoṣa the fundamental metaphysical reality of flowing, durational aspect of consciousness, and would understand the Buddhist theory of momentariness as a logical and intellectual exercise that complements the former rather than in contrast with it. Like Bergson, we are making a case for the experience of duration as fundamental to consciousness, but which is grounded to rather than opposed to moments or instances of the consciousness. This
correct.
was very interesting to me.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so what I'm trying to argue in this is that for Buddhaghosh there is no ontological rupture between the two levels, as in the metaphysical, which is the momentary level, and the phenomenal, which is the experiential level. So what I wanted to argue in my thesis is that there is no ontological rupture, as in these are not two levels of reality where whose sort of ontological existence is such that one is less than the other. No, for me, that rupture is not there. So how I try to argue was that the level of momentariness is just a thorough articulation of the experiential level. And this idea is backed by Buddhaghoṣa saying that there's this interesting theory in classical Indian philosophy called two truth model, Dve Satya model. So there are two levels of reality. There is an empirical, and then there is this transcendental, or whatever you want to call it, that level. In some schools of Buddhism, maintain an ontological distinction between the two. That this empirical level is somehow less, it's real, but it's less real than the ultimate level, and that ultimate level is precisely the level of momentariness. Buddhaghosh, interestingly, is very explicit in saying that there is no ontological difference between the two levels. One level, both are just different ways of understanding the same reality. So the empirical and the momentary both are different ways of articulating the same reality. And I took this claim and sort of like extrapolated it uh, uh, to mean that for Buddhaghosh, the momentary level is just a thorough expression of the experiential level, and there is no, again, like as I said, ontological rupture between the two, which some other schools of Buddhism say. So this again helped me to relate it with, compare this with Bergson, and also contrast both the things are happening. So I agree with
Interesting.
Bergson on certain points, and I disagree with Bergson on certain points. In fact, I just have to mention this. This particular way of doing comparative philosophy, I have termed this as mutual illumination. And I picked up this term from a Twitter exchange with Professor, forgot his name, Professor Bryce Humner, and one another uh, Professor Chow, I guess. Yeah. So there's a Twitter exchange about how to do comparative philosophy, and then they said, oh, mutual illumination is a good way. And then I sort of said, oh, you mean this and this when you mean a mutual illumination? I was like, oh, this is what I'm trying to do. So yeah, we got to label a way of doing comparative philosophy, which is mutual illumination, which is basically that you have a certain topic, and in this case, the theme is temporal awareness, and you bring two philosophers, different philosophers, and make them, speak on the same topic. And by doing so, you can bring their limitations and their assumptions more clearly in a way which help both of them. So that is how it's mutual illumination. They both are helping each other by making them speak on one theme. So this is what I said was the methodology of my thesis, mutual illumination. Yeah, that.
It is very funny that I heard it as mutual elimination instead of mutual illumination. Like,
Oh, yeah.
what?
Illumination. Yeah.
Yes. So, Adarsh, do you have anything else to say, or should we come
Yeah,
to
yeah, we should
Sudeep sir's
conclude, I
tweets?
guess.
And also, we'll have to cut down on the fun part, which these other tweets. Let's just discuss two main tweets, right? Because I mean, it's a good thing that we just discussed majorly about Buddhaghoṣa and Bergson, right? It tells us that there's a lot to discuss here. So just two tweets. One is just to use this tweet as an excuse to talk about research a little bit, which is two abstracts got. So you tweeted for the viewers just some context. If you ever go the rate, at the rate is very outdated terminology. Just at Philo Fakiri on Twitter, you'll find some of the most interesting discussions, engagements, and tweets, right, from Sudeep himself. So there was this tweet from you on June 5, which was two abstracts got rejected recently, hated. And then also, very funnily, you tweeted after a couple of days, two abstracts got accepted, still hated. So we were discussing Adarsh and before you joined this session, which was we wanted to ask what exactly is it that makes or breaks an abstract, right? Like, well, how exactly should we go about it? And also, more importantly, um, this is a little clarification on this question. It's not like I'm trying to ask you, well, how should we exactly write an abstract, or what is the proper way of writing it, or something like that. It's more like what does the person on the other end expect? I mean, I'm pretty sure you must be in positions now where you accept abstracts or you judge it. What exactly is it that people are looking for? And when we get rejected, our abstracts get rejected. To use very crude words here, how to cope with it? How to tell myself that, well, maybe my abstract just wasn't bad. Are there other factors for an abstract getting rejected other than just a bad abstract?
So yeah. Of course, there are other factors, and let me take this first because sometimes what you are sending, the theme that you are sending, isn't sync with, say, the program. For example, I'll tell you in my case, what I want, the one which you got rejected was I. There is a very interesting conference in Oxford which is going on, which is coping mechanisms of mad people, right? So I sent an abstract about the concept of loneliness, and I wanted to sort of critique Ambedkar on one point. But the point being that what I sent, I knew wasn't in sync with the scope and the theme of the conference. So the conference is actually about how do mad people cope with like what are the different mechanisms which are available with quote unquote mad people. So one reason of rejection is that sometimes what we are sending isn't in sync or in harmony with the scope of the conference. But to the first question, I think what should be kept in mind, for example, recently I reviewed a paper for JICPR. So what, at least, like what I was looking for, but what do you look for is that first of all, the question should be very clear, as in what is the question that you are addressing, what is the problem area that you are addressing, say in your abstract on your research paper. This is very important. The opening line should tell me that what is it you want to address, what is the question that you are engaging with, what is the philosophical problem you are engaging with. The question should be very clear, right? So and of course then comes your argument. So the first is the question part, then is the existing literature, what different people, different philosophers have said on the said question, right? And then comes now, how, what is your way of handling this particular problem? Are you analyzing or critiquing the current positions, which is, say, a kind of critical analysis, right? uh, or are you, after analyzing the current position, saying something, have something else to contribute also to the debate? So then that becomes a step forward. Now you're adding something. So yeah, the most important point, I guess, here is the research question. Even when I was writing, I remember when I was writing my, not my PhD, the proposal of my PhD, no, that what I want to work on, I had revised it 7 times, uh, until the question becomes clear, that what is it that you want to work on. The question is the most important part of it, because once you understand the question and what people have said about the question, that particular philosophy problem, then you are in a better position to analyze it and say something else, that contribute something. So finding interesting questions is, it's important, and a question which matters to you, and a question that you can work upon, like on a sustained, which will sustain your attention for long periods of time. For example, as I said, now I'm working on the ontology of past, and I'm reading Bergson in this context, and this, I think, I want to work on this. I want to know about it. So this becomes my sort of the research question, right? What is the ontological status of past in Buddhaghoṣa? This becomes then sort of, for me, an interesting question to work on. So I guess this. I hope this answers.
So is it also appreciable, or and if it is appreciable, then how should one go about it? If one is not trying to answer a question in particular, but maybe they find something. So let me not, when people tell their personal stories and they're like, this embarrassing thing happened, but to a friend, not me. It's not me, right? So they try to distance themselves from the thing from the thing itself, from the event itself. So let me tell you that I'm trying to write this paper, and the way I'm going about it is that I encounter the primary piece of literature, right? And I feel like, well, they are talking about something which I don't disagree with, but it seems like what they're talking about, they have not taken it far enough.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yes,
so then I engage with the pre-existing literature, and the thing, of course, is that if in the pre-existing literature this question were to already exist, that have we taken it far enough, then someone would have already done it. This would have been addressed. But just to raise this question, to justify this question, all right, we went till this point, but well, was this all? Was, did we just have to run a kilometer? Maybe this was a cross country or a marathon. Maybe we had to run 20 kilometers and we did not. So instead of answering already formulated questions, to formulate a question good enough that can be answered, to just ask a question, because that is also the spirit of philosophy, right? We're not just doing the job of a science that we're answering questions, but to formulate questions. Do you think that is also a respectable thing?
yeah.
How should an abstract do that? Like, just because then you wouldn't really have a ready-made question, right? It's more like I'm trying to ask a question, and I'll get to it by the end of my inquiry.
Asking questions. One way of doing this, I guess, can be like, if you disagree with, I don't know if in this sense you mean that, for example, a critical approach, say, to a philosophy or to a thinker, is that you question them on each and every aspect of their philosophy. For example, I read a critical a critical review of Bergson's Time and Free Will, and what the author was trying to do is, he was trying to sort of critique Bergson on each and every aspect of what he said about the distinction between qualitative quality. So like, you don't spare anything from your probing, sort of, say, to say, probing eye. This is one way of asking, questions, but I'm still not sure, like, in what sense. uh, I mean, we can get, I mean, we agree with the thinker, and also we are asking, and we want to take it further. Of course, I mean, that is absolutely, this is how we can
I
do.
I
But
think, I think, sir, I think, sir, I should give you the proper context, right? Because then it would be not just the context is. I mean, in a general sense, it could be when Hegelians talk about it. Hegelians do this the most, right? On the continental side, Hegel was talking about the dialectics, but even he did not take it, far enough. Like the most precise example is of Kant. Kant says there's the phenomena and the noumena. And then Hegel comes on and he's like, in a very Kantian sort of a spirit, he says that yes, 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 of course. But then the thing is, think about this. Even the noumena is not real, noumena, because eh, through negative relations we can know about it. So I can know that I cannot know. So it's still in some way in the realm of the known. So just like that, say in my context, there is Nagel talking about subjectivity and objectivity, right? And he says, oh, he gives this importance to subjectivity, that only the person from that point of view, I'm putting this in a very simplistic and crude language, only a person from a particular point of view can know what it is like to be that person, right? And so of course there's this importance to subjectivity, but then he's like, but there are these ways, there is still objective understandings of things that we have. Now I'm not being a relativist, although I wouldn't mind taking that position as well, although it's very problematic. I'm not saying that become a relativist necessarily, just attack objectivism and that is it. But maybe you arrived at objectivity a bit too soon. The descriptions that you gave in your paper, I'm asking this, having a imaginary conversation with Nagel. Perhaps the descriptions that you gave of objectivity in your paper were still not objective enough, or maybe they had specters of subjectivity in it. Perhaps I could inquire into that and raise questions. So that is the exact context, right, where I'm trying to ask questions, because you give importance. The Hegelian spirit is to inquire into the importance of subjectivity, but I believe you do not give it enough, the credit that it deserves, the credit that is due. So that's the precise inquiry.
a perfect way of sort of writing an abstract. And again, now you're critiquing Nagel on his own position, and it's, I mean, it's very good way of doing philosophy. So you also describe as well as you critique, which is uh, perfectly good way of doing it. Yeah.
So I suppose then that's not the only thing then, right? To formulate questions and to answer them. Perhaps the very act of formulating a question is also something that can be respected by
Of course. And I personally, I think that aspect is the most difficult part. How do you formulate? How do you raise new questions? That is such an important and difficult part. How do you ask new questions?
I see, sir. So, I suppose others do not have any other questions, right? There is one thing, this one tweet of Sudeep, sir, with which I wish to conclude the this conversation, which is the one about living intensely in the present moment can evaporate the past one. So, should I go ahead with that? And I suppose at
Yeah,
the end
yeah.
of it, if you have any comments, we can, just have 5 minutes. But I suppose now we should conclude the conversation, and I would like to read out a tweet. This would be an appropriate way of doing so,
Hmm.
concluding the conversation, that is. And Sudeep, sir, you could talk about it maybe. What was the exact thought behind this? On February 27th, he tweeted, living intensely in the present moment can evaporate the past. I don't think that is valuable or dareable. So that was an interesting seeming tweet. If you could talk about it as the last thing we discussed here today.
Yes. Yeah. Interestingly, my mom liked that tweet. So there is something interesting about that tweet. So the thought process I had was that we are historical beings, product of historical circumstances, conditioned, and we carry our past. And I think it somewhere relates to, as I said, what I'm trying to work now on is the ontology of the past itself. So my idea was that sometimes in meditation context we are supposed to be intensely aware of the present, and there's a very interesting sort of debate between two scholars, Bhikkhu Analev and one more scholar, about what is happening in the act of meditating. Are we, I mean, does the exact word is sati. Sati is like remembering, like so. Uh, in the act of the moment, awareness of the present is there an aspect of remembering happening? And I got to know about this debate recently only. So connecting to this debate, the question is that is it even feasible or desirable to, to be focused on the present when there is this invisible ontological independent past which is always there, which we carry, but it's as Morley Ponty says, no, it's invisible, or as Bergson will say, it's virtual.
So just to inquire for a moment, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
You said ontological independent, but wouldn't you mean interdependent? Like
No, no,
I'm sorry, yes, interdependent. Like the
no, I
past, which is
mean, no, I mean
yes, please,
independent. I mean
independent.
past, yeah, past which is independent of our present concerns. A past which is wholly different from present, which is not derived from present in any sense, right? And that's a very interesting point, because this was brought up by Deleuze on while he was writing on Bergson, and that, like, if we just derive our past from our present, then it's just become again, then we are still talking about the present, which has become past. But what about a past which is already there, which is independent of how we think about the present? And I think now when I think about that tweet, my concern is about that ontology, to understand that ontology of the past, and how can we make sense of that, uh, uh, again in very Buddhist senses, that in the Buddhist sense of meditation, or that focusing on the breath. How does that aspect affect the aspect in which we are supposed to be aware of the present, right? It's a research question, and once I have something concrete, I will definitely send you the paper. But it will take some time for me to write it, right? So yeah, it's the ontology of the past.
So maybe this could, I mean, I don't know to what extent it would help you, but I hope it does. But in fact, I mean, most of Deleuze's positions were not most of that would be overestimating it, but much of it was an opposition to Lacan, right? The French figure, this French psychoanalyst, and so I suppose the reason why Deleuze says that is because I'm inferring this because Lacan had this this way of thinking about the past, which is history is not that which is behind our present, but history is or I'm sorry, past is history historicized in the present, you see. So in a way you
Hmm.
never really escape the present moment, but in the present moment what do you think of history? So a very good example of this could be, because I don't think I did justice to this talking about it abstractly. Concretely we could put it as I don't know, the British or all right, Winston Churchill and Hitler. This is rather controversial, but we today think of Winston Churchill as a far less controversial figure than Hitler, right? This is our past, because yes, Hitler was this evil person, but
Hmm.
Winston Churchill was apparently not. But then perhaps there could be this again. This is actually a violation of Lacan's principle, because I'm now claiming to really go into the past, which it is not. But just to help you understand and others understand what this is about, in the past when we see what Winston Churchill did and what Hitler did, it's pretty much equivalent. Winston Churchill also killed millions of Bengalis and inflicted countless amounts of pain on the Indians and other colonies of the British Raj. But in the present, what the history is historicized as is that Hitler was very evil, but Winston Churchill was not quite as evil. But then, what if every notion that we have of history, of the past, is this latter version, which is the history historicized in the present, the past historicized in the present, instead of truly
Right.
transcending back to the past? So that could be interesting, right? Because that's the tension between Deleuze and Lacan. That Deleuze is like, well, at least the way you put it, that there is this past, and Lacan is like, well, the past is only that which we can think of in the present. So where are you going? Where are you going back to? There is no back to go to. So that is interesting. Could
Yeah.
maybe interest you. So that's that.
Yes.
So suppose then,
Yeah, on the
yes,
last part, I do have a comment upon what you Ayush said. Is that isn't it the case that in the course of the discussion uh, we might are historicizing the present itself, because you said that even Churchill killed millions of people. Okay, so perhaps he was also wrong in some way, and he was not that much from different from the Hitler. Then having a ethical perspective upon anything, might be pointing towards, you are historicizing the way, like you are putting your superimposing your narratives. But in the present case, can you talk about some this neutral thing which is independent upon, can you talk about the present which is independent upon superimposition of narratives, like I am going to talk about the present in a, superimposing manner from my beliefs and all those things. So are you. So where is this present which is in between us or anywhere, which is independent upon that? I'm saying that even
Mhm.
present is
I,
itself,
I suppose
not
that
clear
is the
that.
directive, right, Sudeep sir, Adarsh? I mean, that is the directive, right? Is the past interpreting into the present, or is the present somehow going back to the past? Which way is it? So, yes, these are interesting things. But I suppose now we should not,
Yeah, yeah.
extend this conversation any further, because Sudeep sir has been generous to sit through for an hour and 53 minutes now, 54 minutes almost. So thank you very much, sir, for doing this. We would love to do this again when you have more interesting things to talk about the relationship between Buddhaghoṣa and Bergson, and when you have more interesting tweets which we can discuss as well, right? So I think we'll just end the conversation right here. Thank
Yeah,
you
yeah.
very much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Ayush and others, for this amazing conversation. And I just want to say one thing: my Twitter handle you have already mentioned. To your viewers, please follow me. I'll follow you back, because Twitter is a very nice place until we have that platform. Now it's called X. Like, I don't know what will be the future of it, but it's a very nice platform to discuss philosophy. You know. Also, yeah, my cat Falcon says hi to everyone, right? To all, to both of you, and to all the viewers. So this is for Falcon. Everything is. Uh, so yeah, that's it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes,
This was
sir.
wonderful.
Yes, sir. Can you, like, in the ending passage to everyone, can you tell that people can read you from any, place or something? So it might give chance to the people to know more about you, if there is.
Okay. Honestly, I'm not a person who has like this accounts or anything. I only use Twitter, and there I mean, most of my philosophy happens on Twitter. But I have an account in academia, but I haven't published, uploaded anything. So honestly, there's following, I mean, interacting with me on Twitter is the sort of the best way to do, discuss philosophy. So that is why I mentioned Twitter.
Yes.
There,
I see.
nothing. If something comes up within, I'll let you people know. But nothing.
I see. We hope you enjoyed that conversation. Click here to check out other interesting videos from School of Shastrarth. To subscribe, do not forget to do that. You can click here.